welcome to my channel. Today I'm going to be sharing with you the books I've read over the last 3-ish months. So if you enjoy this type of content, other homeschool and lifestyle content, please remember to subscribe and let's get into it. So we leave for Africa in just a few days, and I knew this last book review would be a little bit longer, like cover more months, because otherwise it was going to be like 2 months and then 1 month. I don't know what reading will exactly look like in Africa. I'll be reading more on my Kindle for sure. I'm only bringing a few like actual books. And so I didn't know how many of these reviews would happen over the next 6 months after we leave. And so I'm just going through all the books basically from the last 3 months that I've gone through. There was several Kindle books. Those were a little bit more like fluff, fun types of books, which I'll mention them just briefly during this video, but I'll mostly go through the like hard copy books that I read. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. All right, so the first books I wanted to talk about are these books from Jennifer Nelson. I think the series is the Trader's Game series. I'm not really sure, but that's the first book. So that'll at least get you started in the series. And I have read several books by her recently. I have some more that I'm going to mention from her also that I really enjoyed. She writes YA books. And I think in the book review right before this, I reviewed the False Prince series, or a False Prince series. I can't remember. I believe this series itself is called the Ascendance series. And I really, really enjoyed those ones. So then I picked up these ones. There's 3 in this series. And these are a lot of fun. She usually has some sort of romance going on, but it's among like teenagers, right? And so, it's a little bit funny in my head because I imagine them older just because I am older. But then I'm like, oh yeah, these are just like little kids, basically, that they're talking about some sort of almost high school romance. But these are almost a mix of medieval-ish times, but slightly modernized, and also have some magical aspects to them as well. So there's a lot of different elements going on. They're a lot of fun. This one, I don't want to give the story away, so I'm not going to tell you too much, but I really liked this series because it's a boy and a girl like on 2 different sides, you know, and just the fight that's going on with that. Like they're supposed to be enemies, but they don't want to be enemies, but then going through all these different self-discovery type things. So that one was a lot of fun. And then the other series I read from her is Wrath of the Storm. Is that the first one? That's the last book. Don't start with that one. Mark of a Thief is the first one. And I actually am going to tell you something. Maybe you can find it now. But when I got these books and went to get, I can't remember if it was the second or third one, I could only get it in like a hardback, and it was super expensive. But if I bought them as like a trio, you know, as the whole set together, I could get them like this. So I'd actually gotten 2 of these because I bought this one first just to try it out, and then realized it was going to be super hard to get one of the books. I can't even remember, but on Amazon, it was really hard to get a paperback book for one of the other ones. So I just bought the whole series and then gave the other book I had, like this one, to Goodwill. So that's kind of what happened for me. I don't know if that's still the case, but these ones are really fun. They're kind of like an ancient Egypt sort of thing, but again, magical and modernized. And I enjoyed reading these ones as well. I probably enjoyed this series more, but they're both a lot of fun and very like clean, wholesome books for like your teenagers to read, even younger. I would probably have my 10-year-old would enjoy reading some of these and stuff like that. And even younger kids, if they can read well, I feel like they would enjoy these books as well. They're limited swearing, all that kind of stuff. If there is any swearing, I can't really remember, but very good, clean, wholesome, just fun books. So the next book I wanted to mention is Here Be Dragons. And I really enjoyed this book when I read it. It's very engaging. It does have some hard topics in it, but the way the author writes, I really enjoyed. And it's Christian based, which I also really appreciated. She does go back and talk about some of her struggles, some generational problems, right? She's talking about the harm that sometimes we can inflict on one another, and sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing it. And so a lot of this incorporates her relationship with her mom, which she didn't really dive as deep into until she became a mom and had a daughter, and then just realized all these different issues that kept coming up. And so she goes and talks through a lot of those different things. And I'm not going to mention them today. Like it says here, it says treading the deep waters, motherhood, mean girls, and generational trauma. And just going through some of those. And when sometimes you need to break from that generational trauma. You know, sometimes we feel, since it's family, we feel the need that we have to stay connected and keep interacting with them. And sometimes that may be true. And sometimes it's doing more harm than good. And so we have to separate. And she goes through and talks about some of those things and the difficulties that come up. I just wanted to share some of the quotes that I had liked. I usually take some notes in the back and just write a few things that stood out to me. But again, it's very strongly Christian based, which I appreciated. And her daughter's name is Caroline. So she said, one thing God has put on my heart during this season is that if I'm always trying to be Caroline's savior, then I'm not letting her lean into the fact that he is her savior, which I thought was beautiful, right? You can step in and help your kids, and you do a lot of things. And as they get older, you still want to step in and help, but there's also, it's important to teach them who they should be relying on and why that's important. And then her husband, I believe, it's been a few months since I read this book, but he said, yeah, it's kind of like we can be offensive and defensive coordinators to some extent, but we aren't in the game. But you know what? I trust my player, and more than that, I trust our head coach, which is Christ, right? Head coach is capitalized. And I just think that was beautiful. Just like we can sit here and we can kind of try to coordinate and see the things, but teaching our kids to trust in their Savior in the end is what is the most important and will help them the most through their different struggles. But I just loved the perspective. I love the realness of this book and how difficult family can be and how difficult it is sometimes to have to break free from some of those generational ties. All right, the next book I wanted to mention is Bad Therapy, Why the Kids Aren't Growing Up. And this one took me several months to read. I think if I look back through my notes of when I wrote it down, because I keep track of how many books I read during the year, it was probably started in like May, maybe March. It might have even been earlier than that. But it's one of those books that is engaging enough to keep reading, but it's also very research heavy and just complicated, right? It has a lot of topics that are a little bit harder to process, and it just takes some time to go through them. And so I would read it for a while, find something else that I would just blow through and just read that instead, and get sidetracked for a while and then come back to it. So it took a while for me to go through it. And I don't think that will be the case for everyone. And some people might not even like it at all. You know, sometimes these books are harder to read, or they're best just like in small doses. So just a warning there. But I did really like this. I have not read her other book, Irreversible Damage. This was the first one I read from her, but obviously these are notes. I was running out of space in the back. And so that's how I like to take notes. I know some people like to just put stickies in and stuff like that. I usually just do it on the inside back cover because then if someone else wants to read the book, then they don't have all my stickies in the way. But one of the biggest takeaways, I guess, for me for this book is that therapy is important, but it's becoming a hindrance in a lot of ways because we're leaning on it too much. It's becoming a big crutch. And my kids aren't in public school, so I don't know what the public school world looks like, especially depending where you live. You know, it can be different. But it talks about some of the different involvement and interventions going on in schools and how they're a little overreaching in a lot of ways and taking away control from parents. And parents are relinquishing that. They're either not realizing that they can say no, or that it's better. Like, it's better if you're the one that's in control of my child, basically. And there's just a lot of things going on. And so, you know, I just talked about Here Be Dragons, and there are things from our past. And I'm going to mention another book that there are things from our past too that influence our life now. But there's also a lot of things from our past that don't need to be dredged back up. And this book talks about some of that happening in schools. And then kids get stuck. Talking about emotions is important, but over talking about emotions leads people to not move forward. They get so stuck in those emotions, they don't know how to progress past it. And I think that's kind of where we're getting at. And so then everyone's more anxious. Our kids feel like they're victims all the time. And it's really hard for them to go past that. And also something this mentioned, which I thought was interesting. I can't remember exactly the context. Like I said, I read it over lots of months. But it talks about how a lot of parents are just not willing to say no to their kids about so many different things. Which is funny because after I read this, I was like, I probably say no too much. Maybe I should think of nicer things to say, and just like watched myself as I said no to the things. I'm like, well, yeah, if they're doing things they're not supposed to, or you don't want them to do something, then you say no. But there's a lot of therapy over the last several years with gentle parenting that is like, oh, you have to be so careful and all these things. And it's just, I think living in extremes is dangerous regardless of what it is. And so this is talking about the swing too much the other way, right? Some of us might have grown up with parents where like they were too extreme and too harsh one way. And now this is swinging so much into like permissive parenting that gentle parents don't realize that's what they're doing. And so I feel like there was a lot of good points, a lot of things brought out to think about, to talk maybe with others about. This would be a really good book club discussion book because there's just so many different points that it brings up. So I think it's a worthwhile read. It just might take a while to process all the information because it is a lot. The next book I wanted to mention is Toxic Empathy. And I'm a little hesitant in a lot of ways to mention this book. There's a lot of points morally I agree with in this, but there's the way that she wrote it kind of just rubs me the wrong way. So she goes through, it says, how progressive exploit oh my gosh, let me start over with that. How progressives exploit Christian compassion. So her definition basically of toxic empathy is that people prey on us as Christians, like you're supposed to be Christ-like, which means you're supposed to accept this and you're supposed to care about this and be loving of all people and everything like that, which I think we are supposed to be loving of all people. It doesn't mean we necessarily accept everything that they do or believe that it's morally correct. And so that's kind of her viewpoint and what she talks about with toxic empathy, like playing too much on that. You're a Christian, you should be loving and more Christ-like and stuff like that. And she goes through, I think it's 5 more politically charged topics and talks about them. Again, several of them I morally agree with, but I feel like she is not very empathetic in her approach to how she writes this book. I have talked through my head so many times why this kind of like irks me. And I feel like that's kind of what it is. Like, I just don't feel like she was very empathetic in her writing of this story. And she tries to victimize Christians. It may be true. It may be not true, right? That Christians are victimized. But I don't like associating the word victim with people generally over long periods of time because it makes us have this mentality of woe is me. And I can't change anything. I'm the victim here, right? Just that kind of mentality in any situation is difficult and hard for us to recognize any way to move past it or how we can improve it if we're kind of stuck in that idea. So I feel like she tries to get whoever's reading this book to feel that woe is me. I'm a Christian. Everyone treats me like a victim and that sort of idea, which is kind of hard for me. So for this book, even though I think some of the points are good, I don't feel like I would ever read it again. To be honest, I'm just letting you know. But if you have read it, I'd love to hear your take on it. Be nice about it. I will block your comment if you are not. I feel like we can have good, wholesome conversations about charged topics without being mean. And so if you have read it and have different thoughts, put them down in the comments. I'd love to hear. But I don't get rid of books very often. And this is one that I will be getting rid of just because I just don't feel good about keeping it. It just is not my type of vibe and not the Christian that I want to be. So before I mention the last book that I read, I took a break for like a month almost and just read fluff Kindle books. So I had just spent, that a lot of time reading these two books. These are very heavy charged topic books. And sometimes you just need a break. And I just did. I just couldn't handle picking up another really deep thinking type of book. My brain was so frazzled, and with preparing for Africa, I just needed something fun to read. So I just went through a bunch of my Kindle authors, which I do every few months. And usually at that point, a lot of them have put out new books again. And so it's really nice. Like I just cycle through and read through all the ones that I have missed. And so I'll try to remember to link some of those down below that I've read recently and that I liked. And it's nice when I can just relax in bed at night with my Kindle and just read. So that's something that happened in between. I just took a break because I was really mentally exhausted from reading some really hard books. And the last book that I literally just finished this morning is The High Five Habit by Mel Robbins. I really enjoy Mel Robbins. She wrote the Let Them Theory. She did it's the countdown from 5. I can't remember what the book's even called. I wonder if it says on here. This one just says the Let Them Theory on the front. But I have the other one too, and I really enjoy her books. And this one, I feel like, did have more swearing in it than her other ones. Maybe that's just me, but I just felt like it did. It had that very more flippant tone to it, which was fun in some ways, but also whoa, just calm down with the language a little bit. But I think Mel Robbins has such a good voice when she writes. She talks about her strength being in speaking. I haven't actually ever listened to her speak or her podcast or anything, but I think she puts a really good voice into her writing. And this one is really fun and really simple. And I think it was really good the last week and a half reading it, because we're getting ready to go to Africa, and it helped with a few anxiety things that helped me calm down a little bit. But her idea with the high five habit is to get up in the morning and go give yourself a high five in the mirror. You don't have to hit the mirror. You can if you want, if you want to clean all the fingerprints, but just putting yourself first. And if you high five someone else, right, you're kind of saying yay to them. She wants you to celebrate you first. And it's really easy to get up and just be like, oh, look at, I'm so tired. Look at these bags. Look at how awful I look in the morning. And instead of doing that, giving yourself a high five first, because it's really hard. I even try, I can't not give myself a high five and be laughing and happy about it. And so just that idea, it's so simple. And she goes through and talks about some other aspects that just helps you refocus. And also talks a lot about creating, making your dreams come true, which might sound very Disney-ish. But the idea of a lot of things are within our control, but we don't think they are. We put them outside our control and say, oh, I could never have that. I could never have that nice house, or I could never be an actor, or I could never do, maybe it's not something you want to do, which is a different story. But if it's something you want to do, or you want to be able to go on more trips and travel the world, you have the ability to make it happen. And you just have to shift your mindset. And so she talks about a lot of ways to do that. It's a very simple read. The words are big. I love big words, guys. They make, psychologically, it makes it easier for me to read books. But she just goes through and talks about those different things. I took a few notes back here, but she did mention, I'm not a people pleaser, so I can mention this. I don't know if that makes me allowed to mention it or not. But she said she is a people pleaser, or at least was more so. And she was hesitant to say this, but she was like, people pleasers, it's also they manipulate people. You don't realize that's what you're doing. She's like, nope. As people pleasers, we're liars. Because you're trying to just be, okay, yeah, that's fine. Even if it's not fine, right? You're trying to she says, if you're a people pleaser, you will behave in a way to manipulate what somebody thinks about you. right? They have all these things now. They think like, oh, they love to do this because you've never said no. If you don't like it, you're just like, okay, yep, I'll just go with it. And so she talks about some of those struggles she had being a people pleaser. So if you are, that might be helpful to be able to read through that and have some of her viewpoints. But I really like the book. She gives, again, some different meditation ideas, some mindset ideas. So this last week, as I've been like a little bit, I've been able to go through them and just be a little bit calmer. My family would say that you're not calm at all, but at least internally, I feel a little bit more calm. All right, so I hope you enjoyed this book review. I will link these books down below. And if you have any books you've read recently that you've really enjoyed or are just curious about, or curious about my ideas about it, put them down in the comments and I will try to get to them. Some of them I might have to read on my Kindle, which I don't like to do with more deep thinking books, but that's what we're gonna have to do because I can't take 5 suitcases full of books to Africa with me as much as I would love to do that. And so put them down in the comments. I love your guys' recommendations. Remember to give this video a thumbs up and I will see you next time.